Welcome, everybody. This is the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley. We are glad you're joining us. We're glad that you find your time to say, I'm going to connect with some Rotarians around the world who are finding interesting ways to explore innovation, entrepreneurship, and education as a part of service to others. That's our club. That's our goal all the time, is to find people who can talk to us about cool ideas, to give us a sense of history of not just the Silicon Valley, but the world around us. To give us ideas about how we can educate people in ways that maybe we haven't before. So when we think about those kinds of things, we think about the different people that we can contact and say, hey, that story that you have, can you tell that to our club? All of our members are very much in that space, being able to say to anyone they know, I love what you're talking about. Would you consider speaking to my online Rotary Club? This is exactly what happened when I was talking with a colleague of mine at Junipero Serra High School. I am a consultant for that school. I work with all of their teachers on possibilities with technology and what they do in the classroom. And when I started working there about 6 years ago, one of the team that I was working with is a man named Christian Clifford. And Christian is a guy who is almost 20 years into teaching middle school and high school. He is a theology teacher at Junipero Serra High School. And he has done all kinds of research on the school's namesake. And so today you're going to learn a little bit about the man, Junipero Serra, the stories around him, the kinds of ways he's been discussed over the last few years as he came into major attention with the Pope making Serra a saint. And we are excited to have a little Silicon Valley and California history as a part of our program today. So members and guests, please welcome Mr. Christian Clifford.
Well, thank you very much for this invitation to speak to you about one of my favorite people in history, Saint Junipero Serra. Junipero Serra has been given many names or titles throughout history. Father of the California Missions, Apostle of California, Evangelizer of the West, a Founding Father of the United States first Hispanic saint. Your Jeopardy facts of the day are that he will be the 13th, or was the 13th person from what is now the United States to be named a saint, and the first saint canonized on U.S. soil. Not everyone admires Serra, though. As you can see on the slide here, from my Twitter account for the book, Serra is a criminal, should have been hanged. He is a more successful version of Himmler. And these other references, using the word genocide, the Archbishop of Los Angeles depicted as, Adolf Hitler with a swastika. And just a few days after the canonization took place, vandalism occurred at Mission Carmel, where the remains of Saint Junipero Serra are, and hundreds of thousands of people make pilgrimage to annually. Since the canonization was announced by Pope Francis in January, many in the media, both Catholic and mainstream, have portrayed it as controversial. One is either for or against it. Fact or fiction, saint or not, saint or scoundrel, controversial, the Vatican having to defend the canonization itself. This one seems a little more level-headed by Stephen Hackle, Pioneer, Saint, Villain. Serra's story is not so black and white. Boyd Cothran, professor of Indigenous and Cultural History at York University in Toronto, succinctly encapsulates the discussion of Serra by saying, it's really complicated. This was the major reason I wrote the book Saint Junipero Serra. Notice its subtitle, Making Sense of the History and Legacy. I wanted to present it in a concise way for the general audience. It is church history, but I have been commended by both Catholics and non-Catholics. My intent is not to give you a summary of my book. I want to help you understand why he is on the minds of many. I will do this by talking about the following: background to Junipero Serra, Serra the miracle, Serra's legacy, relevance in the past, the controversy itself, and his relevance today. And I believe there will be a few minutes for Q&A afterwards. First, background. Who was Junipero Serra? Serra was born and baptized on November 24th, 1713, in the town of Petra, Majorca, Spain. Majorca is the largest of the Balearic Islands in the Mediterranean. He grew up in a poor and deeply religious community. He had a sister. His teachers were Franciscan priests. They noticed his deep faith and intellect when he was just a young boy. After many years of study, he was ordained a Catholic priest of the Order of Friars Minor, also known as the Franciscans, in 1737. He would take the name Junipero after St. Francis's sidekick. His main ministry from 1740 to 1749 was professor of sacred theology and philosophy at Leuven University in Palma, Majorca. He was very popular with his students. Yet something gnawed at his heart. He felt God calling him to serve in some other way. When the call came from New Spain for missionaries, he responded with a resounding yes. After a difficult time crossing the Atlantic, he would land at Veracruz in modern-day Mexico on December 17, 1749. For the next 20 years, he would serve communities, mainly the Pame Indians, who were already Catholic. His dream had always been to bring the good news of Jesus to those who never heard about him and his saving love. He would get his wish in 1769, a few days' journey south of San Diego. For the next 15 years, he would set up 9 missions in present-day California, from San Diego in the south to San Francisco in the north. He would die at Mission Carmel on August 28, 1784. Serra the Miracle. When Serra left Old California, also known as Baja California, and entered New California, today we know it as the state of California, as shown in the 1787 map by Diego Troncoso, he's an old man who came to uncharted territory. Here he would rise above the life of an ordinary man. Recall that he discerned God's call to be a missionary and sacrificed so much by leaving his loved ones to serve Christ by serving strangers. He even shared with the governor that if the natives should kill him, that they should be forgiven and pardoned. He learned native languages to help teach the faith. He stood up for justice, penning what is often referred to as the Native Bill of Rights. He was also a man of his time, using as a form of penance self-flagellation and upholding corporal punishment, actions very peculiar to us today. However, for many it is not a shock that Pope Francis dispensed of the usually required second miracle. Serra's life is a second miracle. He was 5'2", short by even the standards of his time. He voluntarily left the comforts of home, knowing full well he would never return. On his first night in New Spain, just outside Veracruz, he was bitten by an insect. It would cause him great pain, off and on, for the rest of his life. He was asthmatic, and here we are today still talking about him, learning about him. He was only expected to live a few days. We know this because he was baptized hours after he was born. And look at what he accomplished. He lived 70 years, 9 months, and 4 days. The average age then was between 30 and 40 years. His life was one well lived. Many of us already knew this, having prayed to him to intercede on our behalf for many, many years. Serra's legacy. The numbers here come from the Early California Population Project at the Huntington Library in San Marino, California, near Pasadena. They were presented in 2006. The numbers are based on church records between 1769 to 1836. Keep in mind that the Spaniard area of influence was only about 50 to 60 miles from the coast, going up about 500 miles north to south. The majority of native Californians lived outside that area. It's estimated that about 60,000 native Californians lived in this area or sphere of influence. Serra's legacy: 101,000 baptisms, 28,000 marriages, and 71,000 burials at all 21 missions and from the Los Angeles Plaza Church and the Santa Barbara Presidio. Serra's relevance in the past. Starting in 1821, the Franciscans were kicked out of the missions by the government of Mexico, and the missions fell into disrepair. Mexico could not finance their new lands. Native Christians were neglected. In 1848, Americans began to come in droves, and statehood followed in 1850. The native got in the way of so-called progress. In the late 19th century, California seemed a place in need of a past. Serra embodied the greatness of civilization, or the worst, depending on perspective. Some of the following depictions that only represent a fraction of those that exist help tell a story of Serra's relevance in the past. The first Serra statue is at Fort Ord, Monterey, California, and was erected by Jane L. Stanford of Stanford University fame in 1891. This was also vandalized shortly after Serra's canonization by unknown parties. His head was beheaded. He was recently found in Monterey Bay. The next is located in Golden Gate Park, San Francisco. It was commissioned by James Phelan, mayor of San Francisco from 1897 to 1902, and executed by Douglas Tilden, dedicated in November 1907. This one is located at the United States Capitol National Statuary Hall in Washington, D.C. It was dedicated in 1931 to much fanfare. The main supporters of this was the Native Sons of the Golden West. This one should look familiar. It's right next to where I work. It's familiar to me. The Serra sculpture by Kenyon Kaiser was commissioned by the San Mateo Serra Club, a Catholic group whose primary focus is nurturing vocations in the church, and donated to the city of San Mateo in 1969. If you've ever been to a mission, odds are you've seen this statue commissioned by William Hannon, a devout Catholic philanthropist from Los Angeles who made his fortune in real estate. Even the Rotary Club has a connection to Junipero Serra. From the book, The House in Majorca, from Governor James Rolfe, a proclamation dated May 6, 1932, to the people of the state of California, praising Junipero Serra. And then it says here, and so I name May 12th as Serra Day, when the Rotary Club of Majorca at Palma, island of Majorca, Spain, will present to the city of San Francisco the house in Petra in which Junipero Serra was born. It seems from all these examples, from the late 19th century to as late as the 1960s, that Serra had a real cross-section of supporters. The controversy. This perspective is rooted in pain and suffering. It is a tragic history. Our nation's first original sin was the decimation of natives. It is important to note that it worked its way westward from the east, from white Anglo-Saxon Protestant America. The Spanish story in California gets wrongly placed with that history. As Boyd Cothran at York University in Toronto put it recently, in a lot of ways, what does Serra represent? In their native minds, Serra represented the totality of the colonial experience. So when they're criticizing Serra, they're criticizing coercive Christian colonization and massive deaths and loss of culture. Opponents, usually non-Catholic, contest that Serra perpetrated genocide, enslaved others, and was cruel. Regarding genocide, keep in mind that 200 plus years had passed since Cortez and his native allies conquered the Aztec. Serra and his contemporary religious were aware of this part of Spanish history. They wanted to change hearts and minds with the cross. It is true that many California natives who came into contact with the mission system did perish prematurely. This was almost entirely due to epidemics. Scholar Barry Pritzker estimates that in the early 19th century there were 200,000 native Californians. By the end of the century there were 15,000. The near annihilation of the California native came during the gold rush from the 49ers, and oftentimes with the blessing of the government of California. The Spanish government, with the help of the church, was trying to create a little Spain here to keep Russia and Great Britain at bay. It begs the question, why would they intentionally slaughter the Indians they were trying to make Spanish citizens? Next, I would like to speak to the accusation of enslavement. The missions only worked if laborers were plenty. According to scholars James Sandos and George Harwood, missions were designed to attract, not destroy. After learning the basics of what it meant to be a Spanish Catholic, the native was required to work like the Spaniard. Historians share it is about 6 hours of work a day. To leave the mission, one had to ask for permission. Kind of like how what we have to do with our bosses when we want to go on vacation. If one did not return on the prescribed day, one was seen as a deserter. It is estimated that 10% did. People from the mission would be sent out to retrieve the deserter. They would be given 2 chances to return. On the 3rd request, a soldier would bring the culprit back by force if needed. Last, a few contend that Serra was unusually cruel. In the previous example, Serra would have allowed for corporal punishment to make a point that desertion is not an option. This would be taught first, and if broken, physical punishment would occur. This would happen to a Spanish soldier who deserted also. It would have happened to an errant schoolboy back in Spain or in Mexico if he misbehaved. Cal Poly San Luis Obispo Professor Emeritus of History Dan Krieger explained in a September Santa Maria Sun article that thick whips of cord were used that rarely broke skin, called flogging. If Serra was such a sadist, then why was he not killed? When he traveled by land, which he mainly did, he rarely had a military escort. Andrew Galvin, a Ohlone Indian and curator at Mission Dolores in San Francisco, I think sums it up best. He was quoted recently in San Francisco Magazine, "I blame the system, not the individual. Serra was a very good person operating in a very bad situation." The church has done its homework. Thousands of pages have been presented by historians to the church about the life of Serra. Historians, both secular and church, have reviewed the many writings of Serra since the cause for his sainthood began in 1934. The vast majority of Serra historians have exonerated him of such claims. Serra's relevance today. I believe you will see connections between what Pope Francis shared about Serra and the guiding principles of Rotary. You can see here Pope Francis visiting with the Speaker of the House, the Minority Leader, and other dignitaries in front of the Serra statue at the U.S. Capitol. The canonization was on September 23, 2015. Pope Francis shared that Serra embodied going forth, met people where they were, and served and defended those on the margins. As Jeffrey Burns, retired archivist of the Archdiocese of San Francisco, put it in a recent American Magazine article, quote, "What we, Catholics, celebrate with the canonization is not a failed missionary policy, and certainly not the death of so many indigenous people. What we celebrate is a man burning with missionary zeal who loved and engaged the native people of California." My goal was to provide a short primer on Junipero Serra. I hope that it has left you wanting to know more about this extraordinary man. Thank you.
All right, Christian, good stuff. Now let's bring you back out of the screen sharing there, and as we do so, I want to explore the different questions that Martin and Shags and I have. Let me introduce them real quick to our viewers. We have two other members of our club joining us today, Shag Shagrin, our membership chair, and Martin Fox in Utah, who has done all kinds of service for the club and is a youth leadership worldwide known as a youth leadership expert. Now,
great.
Look at some of these questions that we have related to who Serra is, how we think about him. Clearly there are a lot of very difficult kind of issues related to what happened when conquerors were in the Americas, way back early on, how those things persisted, different kinds of treatment. But I'm always curious about what stands out in history as something that might be unexpected for its time. And at one point during the presentation, you talked about Serra having penned a native Bill of Rights. Can you speak to that a little more? That sounds like something that definitely would have been unusual for his day.
That's right. So, Serra, one of the complexities of this is church and state relations. Was this the church purely an arm of the government, vice versa? Did they have equality, what have you? So anyways, very early on, when Serra was in California, he had a lot of problems with the local commandant, military governor. And it was so bad that he actually traveled all the way to Mexico City to speak directly to the viceroy, the king's representative in New Spain, in Mexico City. And he took a young boy with him who was a Christian, who was basically like his a page. And this little boy must have been just amazed at this city of hundreds of thousands of people. And what Serra ended up doing was giving a detailed, it's called the Representación, a detailed description of all the problems he had. And one of them was the soldiers and how they treated the natives. He said, you need to get rid of this commandant who looks the other way because, one, of course, they're not acting like Catholic men, and the outcome is it's scandalous for the new Christian native. This is how Catholic Christians act, right? So there were 34 points, I believe it was, and 32 of the points the viceroy agreed with, and he removed the commandant from office. So there's, it's not all about that, but that's a part of it, and I think it is way above you didn't hear much about things like that during that time in history. Speaking up for the indigenous peoples, yeah,
Yeah,
in
okay.
their rights.
I wanna quickly say that if Shags or Martin, if you want to jump in with a comment or question, just unmute your webcam. You'll be able to do so. And Shags, are you good to go there?
Yeah, I really didn't have a question. I learned a lot more than I knew before because I knew very little except about what I read in the paper. And really, it's just like what George Carlin said years ago, that Columbus discovered America thousands of years after people have been living here, and so, come on, guys, bring in
Yeah.
this stuff. Can you move over? Can you bring in more stuff? Can you move over? Can you bring in more stuff, guys? Can you move over? And so it was just the condition at the time. So I don't think you blame the man; you just blame the politics.
Yeah. Are you in California, Shags?
I am. I'm in Walnut Creek.
Oh, okay. So you're probably aware of all this stuff I was talking about from the media. Yeah, they do send it.
I'm from Ohio, so it was new to me.
Oh, okay. Good.
Now,
Thank you.
and Martin, do you have a comment or question?
No, one of the things I picked up, was a good individual in a very bad situation.
Yeah,
And,
Andrew Galvin's quote. Yeah.
And it's my family came to North America in the 1620s, the Massachusetts Bay Colony. So, yeah, I mean, we were on the front end of that with the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants.
Yeah.
And the huge percentage of Native Americans that died through disease and conflict and everything else through the next 100, 200 years.
Yeah. I think that was one of the reasons why Pope Francis did all this at this time in history, is because I think he was trying to remind Americans that the history that we learn is oftentimes centered in the Northeast, and he's like, hey, you know what? A good chunk of America, there's a lot of Spanish Catholic history that we need to be aware of, and its complexity, but also its the positive elements that come out of it too, right? Thank you.
Well, the story of anybody who kind of steps away from something comfortable in order to do something that he or she is truly passionate about is one that I think can be inspirational for sure. I think that we all kind of live within certain structures that kind of tell us here is the easy way, the comfortable way to be. But if there's something in one's heart that says this is important to me, and you act on it, then you don't continue living wondering what if, right? How do I make a difference in the world?
Yeah, and I see that in Sarah's story too. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Now, as you shared this story with students at Serra High School, how have they reacted to learning more about Serra?
Oh, very positively. I'm just so impressed with my students and how supportive they've been of my book, and I have a second one coming out. The kids were clapping for me, and they ask much, I think, more informed questions about Serra than maybe they had previously, before the canonization. I'd say about half of our students do come from public schools, and I'm a Catholic educator, so I don't know how it's presented. I know the curriculum, but I think among some teachers it's controversial. I've read, they don't even talk about Serra, or they don't even talk about the controversy, or they skip over that part of the curriculum. I don't know how many. It's anecdotal, but some of the kids come from that place, I can tell, and they're a little apprehensive. But I think in time they come to learn more about the man, the times, the complexity, and they start to see more the common human story in Sarah's own. Yeah.
Martin.
What is the connection with the Founding Fathers that you mentioned?
I'm sorry, Martin?
What's the connection to the Founding Fathers that you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation?
Oh, so that's on slide 2, a founding father of the United States. So remember my point about Spanish Catholic history being a good chunk of the U.S.'s history? Well, it's kind of been put on the back to the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant history that most of us learned growing up. And that's why he's a founding father of the United States. Yeah. You know, you and I in our minds initially, oh, wait, hold on. That's the Declaration of Independence signers and the Constitution and Philadelphia, D.C. and all that. Well, there's other founding fathers, too, that had a huge impact on our nation. And we shouldn't forget that, yeah.
That's a great point, and thanks for clarifying that.
Sure, sure.
One of the things that interests me about the talk is that, you know, that point about in Washington, you know, there's a statue. Every state has a statue in the Capitol, and so for California, the statue is of Sarah, and so it becomes a different set of questions that essentially say, when Sarah was chosen to be the statue for California, whenever that happened, I don't know if that was the 30s or at some point.
1930s, yeah.
Yeah, okay. That too becomes an interesting historical question. What is it about that time and that group of people who were in power at that time that they felt that this would be someone who would be able to represent California in an interesting way? And that kind of bridges the you know, kind of the time of Sarah's life and the evangelizing that took part with the missions that everybody learns about in 4th grade here in California, right?
Yeah.
Up to today.
Well, that's kind of a point I'm trying to subtly make, because, you know, this is a sensitive issue for some people, and I want to respect that. However, Sarah's relevance in the past, this is a large group of people that didn't have much in common. I mean, the proponents of that statue, because these are all civil, it's all civilly done. It's not through taxpayer money, right? Hmm. The Native Sons of the Golden West, they're not a Catholic group, you know? The Rotarians, you guys aren't a Catholic group. So how is it that all these different diverse groups really saw the cool things about Junipero Serra? Now, I think a person who's angry or would really like to criticize what I just shared with you would provide one answer, and that is, oh, they're all racist. They're all white, you know? I don't know if it's that simple. I really don't. They would say, oh, white civilization over the native civilization, you know, that whole triumphant mentality. I mean, I'm not going to say there wasn't an element of that, you know, but just a blanket statement, I don't buy into that.
Well, it's cool that you in your book, you essentially took on the idea of how do you deal with the complexities of this, right? You know, I think at one point there was a bit on the slide. It was like the last newspaper piece. It was talking about the competing legacies, and so, you know, we think about how people kind of look at our own stories of kind of who we are, and very much, you know, that sense of history is written by the victors, as they say. And without a doubt, there are going to be those who say, you know, every opportunity to talk about flaws kind of within that system is an important opportunity for history and understanding history well.
Right.
And you know, I'm on board with that idea, as long as we're not doing things like beheading statues, right?
Sure, yeah.
But let's do this, because as one who loves history, I could just kind of keep talking about it. But let's do this. I'm going to give you the last word in a moment. I need to wind down the time because we always go about 30 minutes or so. And I want to tell all of our members and guests, you know, kind of the usual set of messages. 2 things we want you to do, perhaps even 3, finishing watching this recording. Just under it, you're going to see some links. So, for example, you'll be able to go and find out more about the book that Mr. Clifford wrote, and you'll be able to kind of take a look at that and see a little bit more about the information behind it and the things he's doing and getting ready for that second book. And then a little below that, there is an attendance space, and you get to tell us that you were here. And by telling us that you were here, and if you successfully spell your email address right, then it will generate an email that goes to you that you can pass along to your club secretary as a makeup for any missed meetings in your own club. Then finally, towards the bottom, there is the discuss section, DISQUS, and I think this one's going to be a great one for getting some discussion going. And you can always reply to other people's comments as well. And we love having people come in and talk to us about the kinds of things that are powerful about our society, about our history, and about the kind of possibilities we have going forward, tapping into those things that are within us that matter to us. So with that, I'd like to thank Christian Clifford for being a part of what we're doing here. Yay. And Christian, if you have a final word to share with everybody, I will pass that along to you before we close the broadcast.
Well, I just want to say thank you for this opportunity. It's been wonderful. I've spoken to Rotarians before, but in person, so this is really neat doing it via the internet. I hope that I gave you kind of like what I shared with you on my last slide, a little primer, a little taste to pique your interest, to want to learn more about him. There's so many well-researched books about Serra that I think you'll learn a lot about this guy that had a huge impact on California history. Thank you.
Wonderful. And everyone, we will look forward to seeing you again next week here at SiliconValleyRotary.com.